Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. And today's guest is Bonnie Low-Kramen. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, Adi.
It's so great to have you as a guest on the podcast.
Thanks so much. I've been loving listening to your episodes.
Thank you. And the reason why I'm so excited is because today we're going to talk about systems to successfully have a relationship between an employee, basically between a CEO, an entrepreneur, a founder, and their executive assistant and their assistant. Yeah. And it goes both ways. It's not just what systems the assistant should have, but also the leadership. How do you actually utilize the assistant to the max? How do you'll talk about it, so I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I'm really excited to hear both sides of it because, I had several episodes where we talked about the importance of having an executive assistant. We talked about, I talked to several leaders in that industry, but now we're bringing the knowledge that you have on how to create that as a successful relationship. Mm-hmm. And you definitely have knowledge in that area. You are the personal assistant for Oscar-winning actress Olympia Dukakis. Mm-hmm. And we talked about the movie, the film that she actually won the Oscar for. She was in a film with Cher and Nicolas Cage, Moonstruck. And that was the film that changed everything. We're going to talk about that because I'm curious about that. So I love talking about that. And, you were working with, how long did you work with Olympia?
We worked together for 25 years.
Oh my gosh, 25 years.
Yeah.
And then now you are coaching others and giving very successful workshops. You're an international speaker. You actually spoke in 14 countries and you have TEDx talks and you are an expert in that area. So I am so excited to jump into the conversation.
Well, thanks, Adi. Where would you like to start?
Let's start with giving us the story of how you started as an executive assistant or personal assistant for Olympia.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, that is the question I get asked most often is how did I get my job with Olympia Dukakis? And my degree is in theater and English from Rutgers University in New Jersey, which is where I'm from. And when I went to work at the theater that Olympia was running in Northern New Jersey, it was called the Whole Theater. Olympia was not famous at the time. I began working with her. She was running this theater, this not-for-profit theater, and my job as the publicity director was to write press releases and to help get bodies in the seats in the theater we were running. It was a 200-seat theater, and in those 10 months, when Olympia and I were working with each other, it would be like you and I work with each other, in relative anonymity. And it was just, we would collaborate and we would write and we would edit. And 10 months into our work together, we were working really well. She came to me in my office one day and said, "So Bonnie, I just got cast in a movie and I'm going to be leaving town for a month. And you and I have a lot of work to do before I go." And as the publicity director, I was super excited to hear more about what she was doing. So in my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to sell tickets. So she said, "Yeah, I'm going to be playing Cher's mother." Really? Well, wait, who else is in this thing? And she said, Nicolas Cage and Benny Gardenia and this new guy, Nicolas Gage. And I said, "Olympia, are you talking about Nicolas Cage?" And she, to this day, she really didn't know the significance of Moonstruck at first. She knew that she was going away for a month and that she was getting paid more for this movie than she'd gotten paid for a lot of other things. But while she was away, Adi, and every assistant listening could relate to this. She needed someone she trusted to be something of communication central back at the theater, because on any day she couldn't have 20 people on staff calling her. She just wanted one person. So everyone on staff would come to me, tell me what it was they needed from Olympia. And then inevitably, I'd keep my list. I call it administrative triage. And inevitably I'd get that phone call. I never knew when it would come. And she'd say, okay, Bonnie, go. And I would give her my list. That was the beginning of me being her personal assistant. I didn't know there was a name for it, Adi. I didn't. I just knew she had a need and I needed a job. After she shot Moonstruck, the buzz on it was very fast. The word on the street was this film was going to get nominated. And Norman Jewison, the director, told her she probably would win, but she would need to do every piece of publicity that came along. And that meant me. So we were very much a team for 10 hours a day, doing one interview after the next. And that film, of course, she did win, and that changed all of our lives. We never in a million years thought that one movie could change everything, but it did, because the next movie was Steel Magnolias with Julia Roberts and Shirley MacLaine. And then that was followed up by the Look Who's Talking movies with Kirstie Alley and John Travolta.
Oh my gosh.
And that was followed by Mr. Holland's Opus. So it began this series of big blockbuster movies. And what a ride. And I never thought that this work that I began so modestly, saying yes to being a publicity director, would lead to 25 years of traveling the world and having unforgettable experiences.
But it is like an amazing, amazing story. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful, beautiful story. And I'm sure you learned a lot. I know you learned a lot, and that's where you draw your experience in terms of that relationship. Right. So let's start, I definitely want to hear what can the leaders do, what can the executive assistants do, what the personal assistants can do. But what are the biggest mistakes that you see? Let's start with that. So what are the biggest mistakes that you see from both sides?
Okay. Let me begin with the leaders.
Yeah.
First of all, the big given, no matter who you are, you, me, the Queen of England, we all only get 24 hours in a day. That's it. That's all we get. So the question becomes for all of us, how are we using that time? What are we doing with our precious waking hours every single day? And so the biggest mistake leaders make is thinking that they're going to be saving money if they do everything themselves. And the truth is, what I say to leaders is something that a leadership expert, Cameron Herold, says, which is, if you do not have an assistant, you are one, right? You're doing 100%. Administrative tasks. And just because you, as a leader, you know how to do your own correspondence, you know how to do calendaring, you know how to book your flight, it does not mean that it is the best use of your time. Mm-hmm. If you calculate the amount of money that you're bringing in, you can calculate your hourly rate, and your time is worth much more than spending it researching which flight you should take on any given day. So that is a huge mistake. And the next mistake would be to, once a leader decides to employ an assistant, is to skip over the step to spend enough time fleshing out the full job description and hiring smart. There's another saying I like, which is hire slow, fire fast. To slow down, we're in this 24/7 nonstop environment. And so the tendency is, let me move really fast. Let me just get these things done. Well, the decision to hire an assistant and then the actual act of hiring one really pays off to slow down the process and to do it well, as opposed to doing it quickly. With assistants, the biggest mistake assistants make is to not insist on a very clear job description when they take on a position with a lead. They need to meet the executive and the executive's spouse or family if the assistant is going to be interacting and working with those people. It's very important to meet all the players. Again, it can be a really fast process to get someone hired, but are they in the right seat? Are they bringing the right skill set? It's very important for leaders to evaluate the things that they're not good at, the things they don't like to do, the things that take up too much time to do, in order to create a job description that will target the person with the right skill set that can complement the things that they're doing in their life. No one said this was easy to do this match correctly, but when done well, leaders say that oftentimes it is the assistant who is responsible for enabling them, for multiplying the possibility with their income. You know, that some leaders say that they're 2 and 3 times more profitable because they are fully leveraging the skills and talents of carefully selected assistants.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And I know, and I know Cameron Harold, and we've done a podcast together, and he totally emphasized that in terms of an executive assistant.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. What you're talking about, I've seen it over and over and over again with entrepreneurs and business owners. I mean, an example that comes to mind is Chad Gill. I did a podcast with him. He's the owner of Concreate, and now he's opening his second business, etc. And he really was able to expand the business because he hired an executive assistant.
Right.
So it's that I totally resonate with it. You know, I from my own personal experience, it took me a while into my career to decide, okay, I do need an executive assistant, but now I cannot do without one, because just exactly what you were saying in terms of like calculating the time. Is it really worth my time? I mean, I look at a task and I ask myself, is it really for me? Is it really worthwhile for me to do it? Is it the real investment of my attention, of my time to do that task, or can I delegate it? And the more you delegate, the better you do. So I agree 100%. You know, when talking with entrepreneurs, and I'm sure this is probably something that you do in your workshops and in your coaching and helping entrepreneurs, is that I think from what I see, the reason why they don't jump into it and just hire an assistant is for the reason of like, how are they going to have that job description? What is that assistant going to do? How are they going to let go? How would an assistant know how to answer my emails? How would they be able to actually take care of my communications? So what is your answer to that? Because I'm sure you heard it as well, right?
I have. And many entrepreneurs, many leaders they probably self-defined control freaks, that they feel they can do it better themselves. And I am very friendly with many CEOs, and one in particular, she loves doing her own flights. She just loves it. She's good at it. But she knows that her assistant can then do everything else. The assistant can do the cars, the hotels, the planning, the scheduling in those cities where she's going. It's just her own personal preference that she likes to do the flights. It is a process. It doesn't happen. That trust doesn't happen in a minute. Then my job description after 25 years, trust me, was very different than it was in year one. An assistant doesn't automatically get access to a leader's inbox immediately, but there's great benefit to, once that trust is established, to giving an assistant access to the inbox. Because say an entrepreneur is receiving, let's for round numbers, 100 emails a day. If together they can decide 30 of those, it's an easy thing for the assistant to automatically answer those. And then the second 30 could be that the assistant can take a crack or a shot at drafting a beginning of a response to those. That it's a time saver. If an assistant can figure out ways to save her or his executive time is money, and that enables, great productivity. let me say this, you get what you pay for. In New York City, an executive assistant in a corporate environment is starting in 2022 around $100,000, $125,000. Now that's a lot of money, but what you're buying for $125,000 is experience. And that experience translates into the ability to take a look at that pile of activity that an entrepreneurial leader has and to be that second brain, the eyes, the ears, the deep experience that can say, well, I can do this piece of that, this piece, and this piece. Could we give it a try? Let me see if I can take that off your plate. And then they collaborate. At the beginning, of course, there's a learning curve. Usually it takes 6 months to a year before that partnership really gels. But if a leader is looking for a strategic business partner, someone to actually attend meetings with the leader, and sometimes instead of the leader, I would often do that with Olympia Dukakis. Those kinds of responsibilities don't come with assistants who are based in those companies that are overseas.
All right, Bonnie. So how do you actually hire the right assistant for you? How does that happen?
Really important question. It begins with an honest look on the leader's part. Initially, with a pad of paper or on a computer to brainstorm with yourself and be honest about the things you don't like to do, that you don't want to do, that you're not good at. And that really is a great beginning of a job description for someone else. Now, these are tasks that are important to do, but you're not good at it. I employ an accountant and a bookkeeper for exactly those reasons. I could do it, but I'm not really that good at it, and I don't really like to do it. So it's not a good use of my time. I'd much rather be writing. And so leaders need to think about the things that they want to be spending their precious hours per day doing versus the things that they do not, but that need to get done. And I urge a leader to consult with the people in their inner circle and to look at this job description to say, is this it? Is this what we need? That a leader needs honest opinions from the people around them. Maybe that means the spouse. Maybe that means their grown kids. Maybe that means their lawyer, whoever it is, their COO. Other people to weigh in on the job description to see if it's realistic and reasonable. And yeah, these are the things we need done. And then it's about getting this job description out to the right pipeline of people who could potentially fill these responsibilities. In this workplace, I urge leaders to not make a college degree a requirement unless it really is necessary, because you're knocking out a large number of people who have a great experience, but may not, for whatever reason, have a college degree. I urge you to be as detailed as possible with a job description to reflect what it is you really need. Doesn't it matter more, for example, that a person took a workshop in web design, if that's what you need, versus a degree that happened 20 years ago? That kind of thing.
I agree.
Many
totally agree
people
on that.
have candidates in their orbit already, that most leaders know a lot of people. And I'm not saying it's those people who would be your new assistant, but those people know a lot of people. So I urge leaders to start with the people who know them best, with their, on social media is one way, their business associates. There's no better referral than someone who is already working for your company or who works with your company and knows kind of how it operates and knows the culture of the company. So you attract a person who would really fit, who would be a good fit. And then this is key, Adi. It's not possible, in my view, to make a good decision meeting a person only one time. I urge a leader, again, to slow it down a little bit, to bring a candidate into the office space for a second interview, to spend 3 hours, to just be there, I call it shadowing, And to just be in the space and to hear how people speak to each other, and to maybe even do some work that day at a second interview. I call it a working interview. It could also be called that, in order for the people in the organization to get to know the potential new assistant. And that is a setup for success.
I agree.
Those are some steps that I believe work.
I think so too, and I heard, let me know what you think about that. I just heard this week from one of my clients where he mentioned that he got the advice of, when you get a prospect or somebody that you think you want to hire as your executive assistant, to actually start writing emails back and forth, like ask a question and see how fast that person answers. How do they answer? Do you like that? Are you building rapport, not just in an interview? Because as you said, it's one time, it's the interview,
right? And
people have their interview personality. And this way, it can be like a communication back and forth. And you go, yeah, I am actually drawn to communicate with that person. They communicate really well back to me. I feel like the rapport is building. So that can be also something that can be done in order to see if it's a good fit, because it's a personal assistant. I mean, the word personal is a very strong word, right?
Indeed. And it's not one size fits all. If it really matters to a leader about the communication style of an assistant, and I can't imagine that it isn't for most leaders, then that back and forth will show you, are there any typos? How is the grammar? What's the formality? Is it formal? Is it informal? Is it presumptuous at all? There's a lot. I mean, I'm a writer. I think you can tell so much about someone from their writing. I've also heard about leaders who choose on a second or third interview to take a candidate, any candidate, not only an assistant, out for a cup of coffee or out for a lunch, in order to see how does that person behave with wait staff, with a crowded restaurant. How do they function in the world? Is there a sophistication or not? And if that matters, if a candidate will be in front of board members, representing a leader at a meeting, this is something that you want to know ahead of time. It's kind of like dating before you get married. It's kind of smart to do.
For sure.
An audition. It's a working audition.
It is, but it's even more, I mean, in audition, then you get the part, but then you play for that movie. But this is like you were there for 25 years. That's a long time.
This is important. So it bears spending the time and the energy and the hard work. I mean, I'm not going to shy away from that. This is hard work, but the hard work and the preparation that you do ahead of time for leaders, if you choose wisely, the payoff is enormous.
Completely. So, Bonnie, let's look at it from the opposite angle, from the executive assistant or the personal assistant. What are the qualities that you found throughout of you being one and also working with many? What are the best qualities that can tell this is a good executive, or that a person can be a good executive assistant?
Right. And we're now in the 11th year of teaching my class. So it's the absolute truth. I've met hundreds of assistants. And of course, having been one myself, certainly a quality. There are innate qualities and learned qualities, and you can learn to be organized. You can learn how to do travel arrangements, those kinds of things. The innate qualities, the ones that are inside, are a curiosity about different kinds of people and different situations. That there's an unflappable nature to most great assistants, that they don't shake up easily. They are very calm in a crisis. There was once a headline years ago about personal assistants, and the headline, I'll never forget it. It said, "These are the people you want next to you in the apocalypse." They're the ones who are not only thinking of a plan A, but they've got a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. Frankly, I think assistants of the world were among the most prepared when the pandemic hit, because this is the way they think about, well, what if we have to go home, or they all thought it was going to be only about 2 weeks. But they knew what to take with them, that they were like, okay, they kind of went with it. And the majority of assistants are female. They're 95 to 98% female. Other qualities are resilience. They really do ride with the situation, because this role, Dee, it's interesting. The assistant role is one of the only ones in the workplace that is completely dependent on the person they're working with and the person they're supporting. And it's as unique as the leader themselves, that the nature of the responsibilities and the rhythm and the timing and the schedule is very dependent on what's happening in the leader's life, and that the assistant is being responsive to, certainly reactive to it, but responsive and proactive to what's going on. And that's a quality, is being proactive, is kind of like to see around corners and to try as best they can to be a mind reader, to take a look at a schedule and see that leader is going to New York City. Well, maybe they've got an extra day in New York, and maybe they want to have a meeting with a person they've been hoping to get in touch with but haven't been able to since the pandemic. It's that kind of thing. Leaders will say to me, Bonnie, it's not good enough if assistants say, what can I do for you? Leaders want an assistant who comes into a meeting and says, these are the top 3 things I think you need to do this week based on what I know about your schedule. And this is why. There's a difference between let me help you and these are my ideas about what the priorities are based on what I know. So that's what the best assistants have in common, is that they're constantly looking ahead, a week ahead, a month ahead, 6 months ahead, to make sure that we're as to the best of our ability, not getting into knee-jerk crisis management. I have a feeling from your nodding head that you know what that feels like.
I do, because I'm nodding because that's what I tell my assistant all the time. And by the way, my assistant is a male and he's doing great. So I guess he's one of the 3%.
Yay.
I just wanted to give him a shout out.
You hired well. Yay.
I did hire well. And, I always tell him, I like you to be when I was training him, he's like always a step ahead of me, because that's what I need. Somebody a step ahead of me, somebody to lead, because, I know when I can make my decisions and what the decisions have to be about. And those are the areas that definitely the assistant is not part of, right? I mean, like my interaction with the clients, the decisions, the strategy, but there are a lot of things that I delegate. I delegate it so he can be a step ahead, right? So he can be ahead of me, and it's kind of like the trailblazers, right? In terms of like, okay, so they are there and now I have a trail to follow. So I think that's what you're saying definitely resonates with me. It's very important.
Yes. And hopefully he sees the patterns. So if he is used to, typically in a relationship between a leader and assistant, there are patterns that get repeated, situations that happen again and again and again. And so if you break the pattern, if he sees a break in your habit, he might shoot you a text message to say, hey, just a reminder about the meeting tomorrow morning, be sure to remember blah, blah, blah. If he gets a feeling that you might have forgotten something because the pattern gets broken, those are the kinds of things that are innate, that are just built in. I would take a look at the weather where Olympia was traveling. And even if she thought it was going to be warm, it looks like there might be some cold weather. Let's make sure she packs properly. I used to play a game. She traveled so much that the game I would play with my, this is a ridiculous thing for assistants. But assistants relate to this, is the idea that I would consider it a win if I didn't have to FedEx anything once she arrived at her destination, which meant we packed properly, right. Is that we anticipated the right things as opposed to like, oh, forgot this, okay, we got to FedEx it.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And I think, it's super important. I think it's a great win. And I think it's a great metric to actually keep in order to measure success. Did I forget anything? So but when you were mentioning the qualities, what came to mind, and I agree, totally resonated with me, but it's like you said, they have to be very observant. They have to observe what is happening, right?
Yes.
And I find that good executive assistants and good personal assistants are also very loyal. And they also, they can be very they're confident and have high self-esteem, but they don't necessarily need to be in the spotlight, right? Because not everybody's going to be in the front of the stage. There are a lot of people supporting, but they still feel very important, but they know how to put it. So, they know what the leader has to be in front, but they're very okay with this being the support, but very strong.
Very okay.
But very
more than okay.
Exactly.
The best assistants out there really enjoy being behind the scenes. They are not terribly comfortable being out front. And, those assistants who all of a sudden, get that call from their executive who says, hey, I'm running late. Can you just go into the meeting and tell the group, blah, blah, blah. Assistants, with like most things, they get better at it with practice, but it is not something that they relish. I loved the fact that my leader was on stage, literally in the spotlight, and doing her thing, and I knew that my work was enabling her to do hers.
Absolutely.
And that's a great feeling. That's what assistants have, what is referred to as a service heart. A service heart is that inside we genuinely want to enable and empower our leaders to make the most out of their day and exceed their expectations about what they're wanting to achieve.
I think that's beautiful. The service heart is definitely resonates, and also the relationship can be a push-pull, meaning like the executive, the leader is expected to push things in that direction, but also a good assistant can just pull it out of the executive. And I think that a lot of times when an executive decides that finally, okay, I'm going to take that leap of faith and I'm going to get an assistant, but what is that assistant going to do all day long? If you actually find a good assistant, the assistant will say, no problem. Here's what we're going to do. And there will be a lot of pooling of actions, right? Pooling of activities. So then the executive will go, oh yeah, I can see this definitely give me a lot of relief. I can give more and more and more. So that's why you have
it's a partnership.
It's a partnership. That's right.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's not one way. It's not like, as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview or throughout the interview, at some point you mentioned in terms of, it can be that the leader is just like push, okay, so now you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And the assistant was like, how can I help you? Right. So, okay, this is how you can help me to do this, to do that. It has to be really a symbiotic relationship that both benefit, they both win, they both benefit, and they both feel very valuable with their skill set, which is basically a complementary skill set. Or
and there's no leader who I can think of who has gotten to where they are alone, right? No one gets there alone. Absolutely no one. And in many cases, it's an assistant or a series of assistants or many assistants who are making it happen. Any problem can be solved. But with very busy executives, it just can't be solved by one person. Some of the challenges that my students face is that, there's a saying that if you need something done, give it to a busy person. Well, many of these assistants are, running as fast as they can. They're hitting it every single day and they're burning out. They're overloaded. And the best assistants have a hard time saying no. So what I train assistants to do is to really take an honest look to see if it's time to bring on another part-time person or even a full-time person. That's where leaders can really lean on their assistants to gauge the workflow and who is needed where. It's not that any of us are standing still. A leader's business is in constant motion. And so certainly the situation that existed 2 years ago is probably looking very different than it looks right now. So I'm a big fan of very often looking at the job description, looking at the workflow and the levels of activity to have a collaborative conversation about, is this working for us? Is this still working for us? And I would urge that for you and your assistant, Adi, to, you know, just because it was working fine in a certain way last year doesn't mean that it's serving everybody's needs this year.
Absolutely. It's the innovation, it's the moving with the times, you know, it's the moment, the season, the lifetime, you know, depends. I mean, you know, something worked for the season, but not for the next season. Absolutely. So, Bonnie, I'm intrigued in closing. We're coming to the closing of this podcast, but I'm intrigued by your classes and what you teach. It's basically you're taking your vast experience and you manage to figure out a way, because you're very systematic, like you managed to figure out a way on how to actually teach it to others. So tell us about your classes and who is it for and what do you teach?
Thank you. What I realized is that this workplace is very complicated and none of us can know how to do everything by magic. So training is needed. I used my experience with Olympia Dukakis to write a book, Be the Ultimate Assistant. I created a 3-day workshop, which I take all over the world, really, called Be the Ultimate Assistant. So assistants can come to that, and it supports assistants to function at the very highest levels, whether they work for a celebrity, a CEO, etc. In addition, I have public workshops and private ones inside corporations called Building the Ultimate Partnership, where I love bringing together leaders with their assistants together in the same room. It's not done very often. It's considered kind of a very edgy new idea, but it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense to me and to the leaders I talk with. And it's not 2 hours, 3 hours long. Typically, I'll have the assistants alone for an hour and then bring in the leaders for another hour or hour and a half. And there's great value in that. My teaching is really not very much about theory, but it is about what's working in offices, in private homes, between the human beings who are simply trying to work with each other in the most productive, effective ways. I empathize with leaders. You know, I've employed an assistant now for 9 years, and Jen and I get to, practice what we preach. And, so I advise to leaders what I practice in my work with Jen, which is to make it safe to talk to each other. It doesn't serve leaders to have their staff worried and frightened about being the messenger, about being the bearer of bad news, perhaps. Right. I did that with Olympia, and I want Jen to do that with me. And leaders need to know the truth. So it's principles like that, setting clear expectations. These are elements of the classes, Adi, that I teach. It's training leaders to be really clear with job description and expectations, so there's no confusion and gee, I didn't know that I had to do that, or that you wanted me to do that. That conversation in my world should never happen. That it should be really clear up front and not, an ambiguous question mark about, am I supposed to do that or am I not supposed to do that? So I'm in the business of empowering both leaders and assistants to have the work life that they both want in an environment that's respectful and that is respectful and professional, and everybody gets to win in that situation.
I love it.
Sound good?
It sounds amazing. And you know what, Bonnie? Just listen to you having this conversation. You are 100%, even more than 100% qualified to deliver those workshops and teach that, because you have that vast experience of being one and also having an assistant. You've been in both worlds and you understand it. And you understand that it takes that relationship and it is that respect, right? And that ability, that professionalism. And I think those classes are fascinating. And any executive that has an assistant should check it out. Any assistant that is listening to us should actually tell their executives. And those that are thinking, well, I would really like to have an assistant, but I don't know where to start. Well, that's a great starting point. Definitely reading your book and then finding more.
Yeah.
So I would assume you go into Amazon and you can actually get the Ultimate Assistant, right?
Indeed. And right. The book is on Amazon, and my website is betheultimateassistant.com. I have a blog on there. I'm a writer. So there, I've written so many articles. I wrote one particularly for leaders called The 31 Things You Can Ask an Assistant to Do and a Few You Shouldn't. So, I've written articles that are specifically answering the questions that I get all the time, because I want it to work well for the leaders of the world. And I want it to work great for the assistants. I want assistants to be doing work that they love and that are getting paid fairly to do it in a respectful environment. And for leaders, I urge you to know that you do get what you pay for. A recruiter friend of mine says, it just costs more to go first class. That makes sense, doesn't it, Adi?
It does, 100%. And we learn it in different ways, in different places, in different ways in life. Well, yes. Bonnie, it was such a pleasure having you on the podcast. What an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I hope it helps.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.